Okay, we're good to start.
Cool. Honestly, it's a bit uncomfortable because I do not see you and you probably see me. But anyway, cool. Before we actually start, I'd like to say that I very rarely speak English publicly, like today in Meetup. So if anything is unclear for you, anything you didn't understand, it might be because not of you, but because of me. So please interrupt me, ask questions, ask me to rephrase. That's all appreciated. But if you have questions that I cannot answer, please don't write them. Thank you. And yeah, was that clear, by the way? You hear me well? Cool.
Yes.
Thank you. Today I will start with a story, how I actually came to know SolidJS. And that story begins in the end of last year. On my project, we were thinking of optimizing our application. I work on Astra House. We work on applications that runs on the device, and that device is very limited by resources, low CPU, no GPU, low memory. And on that device, we run browser-like environment and we run React application on it. And now we need to optimize it. So there are many areas to optimize that device. And we today will consider one way of optimizing it when we would stay with browser-like environment, we stay with web technologies, but make it faster. That browser-like environment, I mean Electron in our application, and there are substitutions for Electron. There are different substitutions with pros and cons. We were considering Tauri, and that's a separate story. We can talk about that later. We tried, but we won't use it. But if not React, then what? How should we choose anything but React? Whether Svelte will outperform React, whether Vue will outperform React, how actually make the proper decision here, how to look for options. I heard some notification. Is everything okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So here you might hear that I talk about performance and how we can compare frameworks in terms of performance. Yeah, we should look at benchmarks, right? Let me know if you think otherwise. But benchmarks exist for all the frameworks you would like to compare. Fuck your quotes. I will show you the table. It's a very comprehensive list of frameworks. They ordered by benchmark results. It's a runtime duration of rendering. It's memory consumption, basically what we need. And a side note, there is a Beta React project. It's even in that table. That Beta React project is one guy who developed some library that can implement all the benchmark coding. That's impressive. And that guy was like, I like the React, but I want it better, I want it faster, I want it how I want. And he or she created Beta React. Who am I to judge? Because if I were creating that library, I would call it D-React. That's, again, another story. Cool, we can find React here. It's right here. You see it's very far from very performant options, but it's still here. is still with some green color, right? But it has a cell with red color on it. Who likes red color on benchmarks? I bet nobody, and I don't either. Uh, we can go and check those cases. We can go and check what exact numbers React has and how they compare it, why it's actually red. But I'm not that nerd. I see red color and that's top for me. We will not use React. Let's scroll to the left. Here we see a lot of green color. We can enjoy. It's a safe color. Yeah, I'm joking, but we definitely are looking for the most performant substitution, right? Because if we rewrite our application, if we look for options that will actually be fast, we should look for the best. And that's where we can start, right from the left, right from the most performant options. Here we see vanilla.js, but come on, it's 21st century who writes applications on vanilla.js. So we skip one, we skip two. We can go deeper with other options, but if you have a closer look at those, you will see that they most likely are playing JavaScript frameworks with a little reactivity, with a very small community, with a lot of problems that we can face once we will develop our application. So we go further, and there is a very interesting option. That's how I saw it when I first met this benchmark. Solid is right here. If we open SolidJS and look at the examples, basically our React application. They advertise that it's like React application, but much more performant. And if Solid looks very similar to React, they advertise it with like very similar to React part. I thought that we can simply change the dependency in our application, switch React to SolidJS, do some tweaks in syntax, and everything will be very fast, very performant. No problems with memory, no problems with input lag. So that sounded awesome. So I actually started looking deeper at SolidJS. And SolidJS is very interesting. It turned out to be actually that better React project, but built by a group of very skilled guys. It's actually better than React in many aspects. It does implement standards. It doesn't require virtual DOM. Thus, we throw away the diffing algorithm that actually slow nowadays. It doesn't require some hacks that we have to implement with React. Yeah, like especially if you want to know what was the previous value for the prop. Oh, good luck to implement that. SolidJS doesn't have keys when you need a loop in your G6. That's crazy. Like SolidJS actually does a lot of stuff better. But the main interesting thing for me was that components don't re-render. Components don't re-render. It means that we can save a lot. Regardless how good you are at splitting your components in a code base, regardless how skilled you are, rendering the entire component is actually doing a lot of unnecessary work. And So that caught my strong attention. How Solid works, how does it actually implement that? And if you look at the marketing pages, you will always see SolidJS blah blah reactivity, SolidJS blah blah signal pattern, SolidJS blah blah very performant fine-grained reactivity. So it's all around fine-grained reactivity implemented by SolidJS. That's a not new pattern, not new concept here, but SolidJS made it very convenient to use in components world. So I'd like today to focus on this. I forgot to say when I was talking about the story, we actually went a little bit deep with SolidJS, but we finally decided not to use it. So at that time, I confirmed the topic that I will speak about SolidJS. And I thought that by the time I will speak about SolidJS, I will gain more experience and show you guys how great it is. But today I will only give you like introduction to SolidJS, introduction to its reactivity. So you will know that SolidJS exists and you can consider it for so fine-grained reactivity. Let's look at React example. Sorry to the guys who doesn't write on React, but this example seems very simple, right? Let me know if not. Let me know if you if something is new or unclear for you in my example. Okay, I'll continue, right? You're still here. You're still listening to me.
Yes, we're here.
Thank you. Cool. So here's an example on React. It's a very stupid one. It's not usable at all in the real world, but it will help me to show how good SolidJS is. We will eventually refactor this to SolidJS. But firstly, so React example, we define a state, we are in a component, we define a state, we render input, we output that state. On change event of the input, we set a value. And also, once the component rendered for the first time, we immediately set a value. And in certain time, we also set a value. So, simple example, right? Let's start rewriting it to SolidJS. And we first start with first concept that SolidJS wants you to know is a signal concept. It's probably a real signal pattern, but I'll call it a signal concept. Signals, they are stateful in SolidJS. So signals, in other words, signals is something that stores a value. You can reference to that value, and you can let signal notify all the subscribers that the value was changed. That's basically how signals works. And SolidJS implements exactly that. So we create a signal and we can reference the value to it. We can also notify the signal that something should be updated. I also, in the beginning, told you that there are no those bullshit from React inside SolidJS. And that's actually true because we also can get rid of use effect. That's possible because use effects are useless here. SolidJS renders the component only once, and thus anything you do within a component is not considered as a side effect. We do not need those nasty hacks. I called it nasty hacks, sorry for for that. It's a proper concept inside React world, but in SolidJS you don't need it. That's what I meant. Okay, and another interesting thing that I love about SolidJS is that it implements the standards of the web. If you're a React developer and you didn't work on plain JavaScript before, or if you were working with React and switched to other frameworks, you could notice that something works differently here and there. And especially I see that new developers who started with React, they switch to anything else and say that anything else doesn't work properly, because in React it works properly, it works differently. You should fix it. But it actually React who to blame. React doesn't follow the standards. And here in SolidJS, if you want this example to work exactly like in a React world, we should update the event we use on input. Yes, that's my personal love about SolidJS. I love the standards. I love when frameworks follow the standards. So we are done with refactoring React code to SolidJS. It appeared like this. There are no side effects. There are simple code. We go from the top to bottom. We execute instructions. Yep, code seems clear for me personally, because in React we have to use effects when there are no actual side effects. Here in Solid, we simply write the code from top to the bottom. That's very cool. We can do whatever we want right here inside the component body. And now I'd like to share how SolidJS, without re-rendering the entire component, how it actually implements the reactivity. It might recall you something that Svelte does, especially the fifth one. Yeah, but for those who are not very familiar with signal pattern reactivity and how Svelte exactly works, I will share it here. So basically, SolidJS works around special scopes. They sometimes call it tracking scope. To be honest, I'm not really familiar what tracking scope exactly is inside SolidJS world. But what I know exactly that component body is a tracking scope, because they call it in the documentation like this. So tracking scope is defined for our component. And inside that tracking scope, we define a signal. And thus we can now subscribe to the signal and notify the signal to that the value is updated. And that's what we will actually do. That's our first touch of that signal inside the component. We try to output the value, but the interesting part begins here. It's not actually value execution that returns a value and puts in the DOM. It's actually SolidJS compiler who sees the brackets in G6. That compiler converts brackets in G6 into a separate tracking scope. I wrapped it by blue frame. And that tracking scope, that's what will be rendered once signal notifies to re-render. Inside that tracking scope, we execute value. We don't simply use reference to a value, we execute it. And that's because inside the tracking scope, we want to push the reference to the tracking scope to the signal. So once it's done, once it's first rendered, signal knows who to notify once it will be updated. It's not like global thing. It's not like anything SolidJS will inject into your code. It's like this part will be put as a reference inside create signal, and it's done via value execution here. So let's further talk how signals can be notified. And there is no notification system. And there is no need any notification system. Like in other codes, when I first were learning signal pattern, they almost always used some notification systems for signals to be notified. Here, as we said that the reference to what should be rendered stored inside create signal, we can simply let set value go through all the references and execute them. Of course, SolidJS under the hood will patch those updates and do some other optimizations for that, but we do not need anything global here. So that signal is what stores the references to what should be rendered, and set value simply calls those scopes. That means that that create signal doesn't belong to component scope. It can be defined anywhere in the application. And we can write reactive code anywhere else and make our components subscribe to that. It's a very interesting thing for me was like with React, we need to write functions and distribute functions to a separate code and inject those functions into our component scope. Here, it seems like we do not really need that. We write reactive code and we inject that reactivity into G6, and SolidJS compiler makes it very easy to do. Yeah, so that's basically very short explanation how the reactivity works. But the interesting part becomes with this example, right? Here I told you that brackets is what SolidJS compiler converts to a separate scope that will be recalled once signal is notified. But for console log, who actually creates that scope? What value can attach to that signal? What exactly? And SolidJS brings many helpers, many utilities that you can use to work with reactivity. And when it comes to component world and connection to between the connection of reactivity and components, we cannot blindly rely on compiler. So we need to somehow define that there is a separate scope that will be listening to signal notifications. Here we go. We create effect. It's similar to use effect, you might say, but it's very different. We won't go deep. What's the difference? I'll only tell that create effect is for reactivity, but attached to component lifecycle. All right. So basically, we covered already the main concept of SolidJS and what exactly makes it performant, what makes SolidJS outperform React in all those benchmarks. And most likely SolidJS, this concept will be outperforming React forever until React will dramatically change something, because this patent allows SolidJS to optimize it like with concurrent rendering, with many other stuff that React struggled to implement. With SolidJS, they do not struggle, they simply do it. Okay. What else about SolidJS? I already told you that I don't have very deep knowledge with SolidJS because eventually we decided not to use it for our specific case. But I'll quickly cover some interesting parts from the documentation. Interesting for me because I was mostly React developer, and those new stuff are new for me. For example, create resources here. Oops. Create resources. It's actually how we connect asynchronous executions to signal pattern. Because in React, if you work with asynchronous code, I mean with stable React, not a canary one. If we want to work with asynchronous code, we need to define it as a side effect. We need to connect it somehow with a state, and that state will trigger the updates. And it's getting worse when we need to handle errors of those asynchronous codes, etc. In SolidJS, we would also need to do a lot of that stuff, but they thought about that in the beginning and created a very convenient stuff for me to work with asynchronous code. On mount was also a new for me, even so I knew about use effect in React. Yeah, that's what we use to work with on mount callback. But here with SolidJS, once I got familiar with the concepts, the ideas that SolidJS adopts in the framework, I realized that it's very true that we need a separate effect only for DOM changes. Only once a DOM mounted first time, second time, other times, and separate them from other side effects. Yeah, so this was like new for me, even so we have a very similar substitution in React. On cleanup, you might say it's like a return function of a use effect callback inside the React, but on cleanup actually doesn't care about the components, the effects. What it does, it takes tracking scope and executes a callback once the tracking scope is disposed or recalculated. That means you can use on cleanup in your component, inside create effect, within the component, within other reactivity scopes that you define in your application. You always can use the same stuff. If you want to catch its disposal or recalculation, you can use that on cleanup. That was also interesting for me because like would like to track what was changed in references in React, what was changed in state without use effect. Yeah. Merge props and split props. It's also an interesting stuff in SolidJS because everything is reactive unless, well, actually, if you define a signal and pass it to as a prop, your props are not a batch of signals. Each individual part is a signal, but passing signal from one component to another one is a tricky part. And it goes hard when we apply the destructuring or spreading pattern, right? For default prop values or for destruction when you need only part of the props. And there are helpers for you that will help to follow reactivity once you pass the components. Yeah, again, guys, I'm not talking here saying that you should use those. Those are great. Those are like world-changing stuff. I'm just speaking about new things related to SolidJS. That's probably what you will need to learn if you will ever come to SolidJS. So I just make you familiar with that. Run with owner, I won't go deep as this because it requires for me to cover a lot of more concepts in SolidJS. That's probably a separate topic that I will never do for you. Create reaction, create render effect, create depth. That's all very granular methods. In React, they partly cover it. And in React, we use the same stuff for many things, while here you actually control what and use exactly what you need. If you need one thing, you should use this. If you have another thing, you should use this. It's not like if you need one thing, use effect, you should this one or use effect, but with dependencies. Yeah, it's not like that in SolidJS. There is use context, and here it's an exact match of use context of React, especially for the developers. Under the hood, of course, it's a different part. Yeah, in SolidJS, I told you that those brackets create separate effects, and it's not basically a problem. If you do not use any signals inside those effects, inside those separate scopes, nothing will be hard than simple render. But if you need to actually output an array, like a collection of blog posts in your component, if you need to do so, it's better to use special components which are built in SolidJS. They advertise those components because they can be very optimized by the compiler. It's not about the types, like we must know the type to know how to optimize. No, it's like they can create signals, they can track dependencies better and more performant than we can do manually within J6 syntax. If we write our markup in simple functions, we can repeat it, but they do it within those components. Yeah, finally, there is no class name attribute. Thank God, nobody likes class name, right? They use simple class, but they also give you more interesting helpers to work with classes. Like in React, we use separate libraries to write class names list correctly. SolidJS has it built in. You can write derives for the components and pass them down. That's like very interesting. You can still pass signals as a prop, but you can stop notifications to the down scope of the down component simply by saying it should be passed only once. Yeah, that's basically what I learned around those concepts. Those things caught my attention here. I shared them with you. And remember, in the beginning, I told you that I can simply switch the dependency from React to SolidJS, and everything will be working as it is. Only a few tweaks will be necessary. That might be true in certain cases, but if you want to achieve the performance that we see in the benchmark, if you want that green color for your benchmarks, you should adopt those concepts. And once you adopt, you will figure out that the SolidJS actually a completely different framework. And would I recommend SolidJS for you? And I would definitely recommend SolidJS. If you're a React developer, I would recommend for you to learn SolidJS. SolidJS competing with Svelte, but if you do not, for some reason, don't like Svelte, SolidJS outperforms it. Well, they are similar if we compare with Svelte fifths, because Svelte fifths uses, as far as I know, they use similar concepts. They started using signals, started more explicitly control the effects they define in the eventual result. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend. SolidJS has less community than React, definitely, most likely less than Svelte, but it's already production ready. It's fast growing. There are tool chains that you can use for web applications, like SvelteKit, Next.js. It's not as good as Next.js, but there are something, and it's growing. People write many libraries for SolidJS. They're not far different because the concept that you do not re-render the component, you do not constantly change the DOM, allows you to work with native libraries. And those native libraries usually are really good because they time proofed. Yep, so SolidJS. Another interesting point, why would I recommend it here, is because that reactivity system suits very good once you need a lot of dynamic things on one page. Because with React, it's getting worse the more dynamic elements you put to one page, because everything starts re-rendering constantly on development, even twice. If you got the joke, you're cool. And with SolidJS, it doesn't work like that. They do not render a lot without almost no effort. React is also good, right? We can optimize those constant renders. We can optimize what exactly should be scoped to render part. But in SolidJS, it's like you think that way and it works that way. So that's what I like here. Yep, I'm actually finishing for today. I intended to give you an introduction, basically to advertise SolidJS, to advertise your end code, your attention, and put it to SolidJS world, if you are a React developer especially. And yep, that's basically it.
Nice joke with running twice in development.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Do you wanna guys discuss anything about SolidJS? Maybe you have questions. Maybe I was wrong anywhere during the explanation. Maybe something was suspicious for you. Yeah.
I want to kick off this conversation, and the main question that was going through the whole your speech, like for me, why eventually did you decide not to use SolidJS in production? What was the other way you went?
I believe because I started leaning towards game changer for our application. Those rewriting will save us a little bit of time, but will also keep us limited to what we can eventually optimize and to what we can eventually do with our application. I mean, staying with web technologies. And thus we decided to look for not web technologies or to something else.
Okay.
That's why not SolidJS. If we would stay with web technologies, I would give a shot to SolidJS, definitely.
What's your opinion about React, like the one that starts with P? Is it alive, by the way? Like,
Oh, it does.
okay.
It's alive. But I'll quickly share my screen again. You see it, right?
Yep.
So here we have Solid. If you do not like functions, you can look for Inferno. If you Svelte familiar, please don't argue against Svelte Fifths, because Svelte Fifths is somewhere here. But if we talk about Preact, let me see where the red color comes.
You skipped.
Yeah. So Preact is good. It outperforms React. You can see what, but it's not like a different story.
Okay.
Interesting that in that benchmark you showed, Million outperforms SolidJS.
Who outperforms?
Million is a tool to
Yeah.
optimize React, and I didn't know that it outperforms SolidJS, but I don't know about limitations of the Million.
Well, I decided not to consider Million. Well, it's a separate topic, for sure. But Million is mostly rely on React. And instead of getting one major dependency, we will get two major dependencies, which might be broken at some point of time. And I don't like to be trapped like that. Yeah, but it's a separate topic we can discuss.
Yeah, it would be interesting to listen how it optimizes.
Yeah, I bet they simply throw away half of React that nobody uses. Yeah, I'm just joking. Yeah, Nikita wants to say something.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but I heard that React also reconsidering the approach towards something else. I mean, maybe they're trying to get rid of this Shadow DOM or whatever. Like, will it be significantly faster, or it will be like the same?
I don't really know. If they remove virtual DOM, I believe the virtual DOM is what slows down React nowadays significantly. It's not like React optimized very good in other aspects, especially the event system, but virtual DOM is definitely what slows them down. Yeah, but I honestly don't know how to answer.
It should be faster and more convenient to use, as far as I know, because they plan to automatically memorize a lot of things that now we need to do it manually. So they should optimize performance out of box automatically.
Another
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned that like Svelte Fifths is like really close to Solid, and I'm just asking like, is there any pros to use Solid for a developer, except if like the developer is familiar with React? Because like as I see Solid like more like close to React than like a Svelte approach where the code looks like maybe like plain JS. So any other props except like familiar with React dev?
Well, I'm not a good person to answer that question because I don't have deep knowledge of Svelte and no SolidJS. From a first glance, it seems like Svelte 5 is gonna be very similar to what SolidJS gives you in terms of syntax, but I'm not sure. Sounds like I would not recommend. If you're familiar with Svelte, there is, and you are okay with Svelte 5 changes, there are no reasons for you to consider SolidJS. Because the benchmarks I showed you, they are like, they're a little bit outdated now. You can open those benchmarks, the most up-to-date, and Svelte 5 is like somewhere probably more performant than SolidJS. I don't remember exactly.
Can you please drop a link?
Yep. I
I
can.
would say that yeah, Svelte 5 is definitely based on signals, and from the writing code perspective, it will be almost the same. I mean, it will look almost like the plain JS, except you will need to use less special syntax stuff. Right now, you need to use these $signs almost everywhere where you need reactivity. In Svelte 5, you will use this $state or whatever they call runes. So basically, that's mostly it, and it will still be more convenient rather than using all these callbacks and stuff.
Thank you. Just in case, on Data Rockets dev channel, I shared benchmarks. You can see how they were changing through the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cool.
Okay, guys. So that's gonna be the very last call for the very last question. Does anybody have something to ask? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So let's call it a meetup. Thank you, Eugene, for this wonderful talk. It was a very interesting topic. And I also made some notes after a talk for some of our future meetups. Yeah, thank you once again. And that's it. Have a good week, guys.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.